Have you ever stopped to think about what's really going on in the men's fashion world? Because, it's not just about what's on the runway. Right now, it's a story of some pretty wild financial swings and, honestly, strategic survival. So let's get right into it.
Okay, we're kicking things off with what is frankly the most shocking part of this whole story. Just look at this chart. In 2023, the menswear industry was cruising with a super healthy operating margin of over 41%. 1 year later, it completely falls off a cliff into negative territory, a loss of almost 4%. I mean, how does an entire industry just do that? That's the big mystery we're going to solve today.
So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the big financial picture. Then, we're going to zoom right in and decode the numbers. After that, we'll hear from the people in charge, inside the boardroom. We'll look at the challenges ahead, and then we'll wrap up by exploring where the real opportunities for growth are hiding.
All right, first stop, the overall financial health of the industry. And this is where things get really interesting, because there's a huge contradiction. You see, while profits were on this insane roller coaster, the revenue, well, that's a whole different story. This slide really just lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, you have revenue, which was pretty stable. People were still buying clothes. Sales weren't the issue. But on the other side, the profit they were making on those clothes just evaporated. So the main takeaway here, this was never a sales problem. It was a full-blown profitability crisis. Something was chewing up all the money.
So, let's move on. It's time to put on our detective hats and follow the money. To really understand what happened, we've got to dig into the profit and loss statement and find out exactly where those profits went.
Okay, so this right here is basically the financial DNA of the sector. Now, don't worry, we're not going to get lost in a spreadsheet. I just want you to look at one line in particular, cost of material. The entire story of that margin collapse we saw, it's hiding in plain sight, right there.
And here it is, the number one culprit. In 2023, the cost of materials was a totally manageable 22% of revenue, but in 2024, it just exploded to 63%. Think about that for a second. It went from costing 22 cents on the dollar to a whopping 63 cents just for the raw materials. This one thing explains most of that profit collapse right there.
But it wasn't just materials. That was the big one for sure. But by 2025, even when material costs started to come back down a bit, other expenses were on the rise. We're talking labor, sales commissions, shipping. It's like a death by 1,000 cuts. Costs were just going up pretty much across the board.
So the numbers tell us what happened, but they don't always tell us why. For that, we need to go inside the boardroom and listen to how the companies themselves explain this whole mess.
This quote really hits the nail on the head for the demand side of the equation. After all that inflation, you and I, we're all watching our wallets a lot more closely. And that makes it almost impossible for brands to just raise their prices to cover their own rising costs. They're stuck.
And then, on the supply side, you've got this. We're talking about bigger, global stuff, geopolitical issues, tangled up trade routes. All of that created chaos in the supply chain. And that chaos, it leads directly to that spike in material and shipping costs we saw in the numbers.
So, when you put it all together, it really was the definition of a perfect storm. You had costs skyrocketing because of global problems happening at the exact same time that everyday shoppers were becoming way more cautious about spending. The industry just got squeezed from both sides.
Okay, so that's the story of how we got here. But what about where we're going? The worst of the storm might be over, but the waters are definitely still choppy. Let's pivot and look at the big challenges the industry is facing as it tries to get back on its feet.
And yeah, it's a long list. You've got ferocious competition from huge global brands and those super fast fashion companies. The geopolitical stuff hasn't gone away, so supply chains are still pretty fragile. Plus the cost for everything, materials, labor, even just rent for a store. They're all still climbing. Well, economic jitters keep shoppers on edge. It's a really tough environment out there. But wait, it is not all doom and gloom. Not at all. A crisis like this often forces real innovation. So for our final section, let's look at the flip side, the exciting opportunities, and the smart new strategies brands are using to do more than just survive, but actually grow. I love this slide because it just lays everything out so clearly. On one side, you have these huge headwinds pushing against the industry, like price-sensitive shoppers and volatile supply chains. But on the other, you've got these powerful tailwinds starting to pick up speed. Things like sustainable fashion, the massive growth in e-commerce, and this big strategic move toward premium, higher quality products. Let's really zero in on that last one, premiumization, because this is a huge deal.
It's not just about making things more expensive. It's a really smart pivot away from that race-to-the-bottom, low-margin game. Instead, brands are focusing on better quality, on craftsmanship, to attract customers who are starting to see clothes as an investment, not as something disposable.
So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, here's the playbook the smartest brands are using. First, they're truly embracing sustainability, using things like GOTS-certified cotton, that's the Global Organic Textile Standard, by the way, and other eco-friendly practices. They're also pouring money into technology, AI, data, and powerful e-commerce platforms so they can talk directly to customers, especially in smaller cities. And finally, they're innovating their products with things like premium innerwear or even made-to-order services.
So all of this brings us to the big final question. The menswear industry has been completely reshaped by two massive forces: the rise of a more conscious consumer who wants quality and sustainability, and the crazy pace of digital change. The brands that are going to win in this new world won't just be the ones selling clothes, they'll be the ones that sell a real vision, real value, and a real connection to their customers. The race is definitely on.